it's a deep drive that people who have disadvantage, it shouldn't define them, it shouldn't define their lives. I mean, I think the other thing about children and young people coming into care, to be very clear, it's not their choice.
So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands we meet today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and all Aboriginal people who are listening and viewing this today. And just to also acknowledge the young people and children that we support and who are the leaders of tomorrow.
Thanks, Brendan. So today on our podcast, we'll be interviewing the lovely Heidi from Anchor. And just a little bit about Heidi before we start things off. Heidi remains deeply committed to young people leaving care and has been an advocate for young people that it be a much better experience for them leaving care since the early 1990s. Heidi has an experience herself of fostering and remaining committed to a woman now in her 40s and her family. She's a seasoned and committed human services executive with experience in government and the not-for-profit sector for over 40 years. Along with this, Heidi's got a very strong interest in the intersection between childhood trauma, disadvantage in adulthood, and a person entering the justice system. With years of experience in several states of Australia and New Zealand, Heidi has been the CEO of Anchor Inc.for over 6 years.
Yeah, Anchor is an independent community-based organisation with a proud history of serving Melbourne's outer east. Anchor supports some of the most vulnerable in our community through the provision of quality services, which includes homeless support, foster care, counselling, kinship care, community education and family reconciliation.
Yeah, so today, just before we pop into our podcast, we've titled it Leaving Care Preparation. So what's missing? So our listeners today, welcome Heidi to our podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your lovely words, both Brendan and Lee. It's lovely to join you this afternoon.
And yeah, just to tip it off, Heidi, we just wanted to say, so our listeners can get to know you a bit more. Some may know you, but some may not. Just a quick question off the cuff. What actually brought you into the sector?
Look, it was a very long time ago. I started my career working with children and people with disabilities, and that was, I was very passionate about that. But I guess in the very early 1990s, I became aware of children and young people in care in large settings, institutional settings. And I guess that, like most people, I believe that it was it was in the child's best interest to bring them into care. When I started to get to know the care system at that time in the early 90s in New South Wales, I was sadly disappointed that, in fact, many children and young people actually potentially had worse lives because they were brought into the care system. And I guess that I realised that it was far more complex than I ever imagined. There were far more shades of grey about what was right and what was wrong than I ever imagined. And I guess it's probably fair to say I've spent the last, however many years that is, 30 odd years, trying to work that out and trying to unpack that. And I'm still not there.
Yep. Wow. So it's interesting. The beginnings were in New South Wales and just thinking it was one way, and then just getting your eyes open to this. And it's been an ongoing journey, I'm hearing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so, look, I've been around working within not-for-profit and the government during and after legislative changes. I've got to say that both New South Wales and Victoria changed their legislations quite markedly 15 to 20 years ago. I think it's probably fair to say across Australia now, the legislative framework for child protection, protecting children, is getting a bit long in the tooth. It's getting old. It needs refreshment. I think there's probably a lot of older type assumptions made of children and families within that, sort of held within that legislation. So yeah, it is a far more complex area than one could ever imagine. And certainly I could ever imagine. But I guess that because it's so complex is what's driven me all these years. And, you know, I do have kind of jokes with people that I have known for over 30 years, you know, yep, I'm still in there and I'm still fighting the battle. Don't you worry about that.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the thing I'm seeing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I can hear the fighter within you and the passion within you for advocating for people. So where did that come from? I'm curious to know. Where do you think that came from?
Look, I think they are part of an adult world that they know very little about, that moves them around like little pawns on a chessboard. And they have very little agency and control over that. And you know, there are a lot of people involved in the system who have wonderful intentions. I mean, there's, you know, I don't want to discount the wonderful work that I've seen over the years, but I guess the system is a beast. It's an absolute beast. And you know, you can be someone in the system trying to engage in really best practice, but you've got so many parameters to work in: financial, political, legislative, you know, what's possible, what's not possible. The reality is we don't have a sort of an endless money pit to draw from for the things that we'd like to do. So yeah, so I mean, I've taken very much, because it can get very overwhelming, and a lot of practitioners in the sector. In fact, I did a mini MBA this last week, and I was the only one from our world, or the sort of, you know, not-for-profit world, I guess, in it. And there was a lot of people at mid-career, and that's sort of early 40s, and they were all very passionate about what they did and very, very ambitious and all that sort of thing, you know, MBAs and all. The presenter said to me in a quiet moment in a lunch break, he said, "How do you keep doing this? How do you deal with this day in, day out? How do you keep doing it?" And I said to him, "Look, you know, I think over the years I've learned to celebrate the small wins." And also the other thing I reflected on is actually each individual life is important. And so if you get very overwhelmed with the system and all these kids and all this is, you know, terrible or whatever, you actually lose the opportunity to think very closely and clearly about that child that's right in front of you at that time. And what I learned in this mini MBA course over the week is that the more that your mind is clouded with busy and noise, the less opportunity you have to actually take up an opportunity and to actually make it, you know, make it your own. So those sort of theories I had that have been floating around in my head, I think, you know, really came to roost this week. That's
awesome, Heidi. Wow. Mini MBA.
I don't know what was mini about it, I've got to say. It felt like a lot was look, basically it gave us all a taster of every single thing that you do in an MBA, but just within a week. Look, it was a really interesting way of being introduced to it all. And as I say, it is often about the group. And, you know, I met some really lovely people and, got to know them. So, you know, I went into the week thinking, oh, goodness gracious, you know, 5 days in the city, you know, but actually I came out of it thinking, that was a good thing to do. So
I love it. And I like that you reflected on the, sorry, you were going to say?
No.
On the small, looking for the small change and looking for the small steps, because the overwhelming picture, I've only been in the sector like for half of the time compared to yourself, but I've had people well-meaningly say, how do you stay there? How do you stay there when you see so much of this and so much of that, and then the kids come out this way? And I really relate to the small, like looking for the small change, because that's what I really think that's amazing. And what were you going to say about positive?
like, yeah, I like, you know, the person in front of you, when you focus on the one and you say, yeah. What can I do? I can, you know, focus on the one, and yeah, if you do that, then you can see, you know, change, or you can focus on, and that's the important part. Yeah, and I like you saying about celebrating wins, because, you know, that's what keeps you going, really, because you see a lot of people coming and going in the sector, you know, that because they're looking at it too big, they're looking at the big picture. And
and look, there are things as human beings that there's a lot of things as human beings that we'd probably rather turn away from, you know, that are not very tasteful things of being human beings. There's many, 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 many things of them. So I think, yeah, you can only affect the change you can affect in your patch, and you need to leave work or leave your life knowing you did your best, you know, with what you had.
Yeah.
So what challenges do you see young people facing when they're leaving care? What are the sort of the main challenges that you see?
Oh, look, you know, the main challenge, I wrote it down somewhere. The main challenge really is reconnection and recalibration of relationships. That's absolutely the most important thing. And if you can work with that or have that front of mind, you will actually lead a young person to have more success. I learnt this very much in the Brighter Futures pilot that Anchor led in the state of Victoria, that was funded by the Out of Home Care.
Can you unpack the Brighter Futures for?
Sure. Yeah. So look, fairly simply, Brighter Futures theory, the theory that we were trying to prove, was that if young people were connected in the community and felt as though they were part of the community, then they would be able to access resources, not paid, you know, but resources and support of their own, you know, that they wanted. And so in Brighter Futures, I mean, and what led us to that theory of change, if you like, really, was that a number of young adults with a lived experience of being in care said, look, you guys out there, you take us into care, you adults, you take us into care. You need to make sure that we have a place to live. You need to make sure that we have a job and that we're healthy, etc. You need to make sure, because you're the parents, that's what you've got to do. But what you don't do and you never think about is how you make us feel like aliens, how you make us feel like the other, and how you make us feel different.
Wow.
And we even had one young woman who felt as though she should walk across the other side of the street because she looked different. Now, she was absolutely beautiful and there was nothing different looking about her.
Wow.
But that was her perception of self, was that the system had made her feel so different to everybody else. And I think, you know, that this, you know, and I think this really expresses itself when children who are in foster care become teenagers and they start to unpack their identity and they realise, right, you know, people are not like me. People have very different lives to me, and we just make it worse and worse. So we actually vilify and demonize their parents. So their parents are always bad. This is their eyes. This is what they hear, regardless of what we might say to them about, oh, you know, your mum's really trying or your dad's trying or whatever. What they hear loud and clear is your parents are bad. And so they think, well, my parents are bad, so I'm bad because I'm a product of them. I came out of mummy's tummy, so I must be bad too. And we don't change that view because we sort of the earliest memories of the system are, got to get you out of here. You're being harmed. Oh my God, we've got to get you out of here. And the child protection workers and police that are running around and creating this creating this emergency
Chaos,
and chaos and emergency. So that's the first thing a child coming into care sees, is this chaos and emergency. And we don't really ever manage to dispel that.
No.
no.
It becomes normal for them. So that
well, we don't rectify it. You know, I think to myself, we remove their primary source of attachment. But we don't really ever replace it.
Traumatic experience.
Very, very traumatic.
And Heidi, on that point, just remembering Erin and also Dylan said the similar thing when you said about, I feel so different. Like there's times where Dylan on our podcast and also Erin separately said, I actually finally felt like normal. I felt normal. And I'd never, until you said that and they said that, I'd never even thought that was an experience. I thought to myself when I was even looking after them, how would they even know that they're any different? But they said that we actually Dylan said, finally I actually felt normal because I was taken out to a restaurant and I got to eat a really nice meal and I realized there was something different out there. And just that feeling of being, it's like a stigma, isn't it? So
they both said, you know, that
really strongly, they love the feeling of being normal for one.
And look, and I also think, as I say, going back to birth family, because birth family is demonized and so much of it in the system, and this is just, you know, maybe a sweeping statement, but it's also secret. It's also secret and so many secrets. And I think these kids grow up with so many secrets around them because their abuse often will have been an original secret. But the secrets don't stop. The secrets just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, they go to high school and they might have told kids in primary school, oh, you know, I don't live with my mum and dad, but I live with, you know, I live with Lee and Brendan. And kids go, oh, okay, you know, like kids don't care. But then they get to high school and people say, well, why? You know, why is that? Well, don't you want to go home to your mum and dad? What do you mean? You know, you're not living with your mum and dad. Like, what does that mean? You know, like, and I think a lot of kids, they just keep that a secret. They don't tell other kids. They don't tell other kids, and they just, you know, go into their little shell because, you know, and it's little small things that it's the little things that count, you know. So it might be that, you know, that at the school concerts, oh, there's my mum and dad, or there's my mum. And just those little things that mean so much to kids, so much. A lot of these kids don't have.
And it's not at all the same thing, but I remember Brendan sharing when he grew up and he lost his dad early at 12, and then a brother came along on Father's Day thing at school, and he felt so, didn't it? Was really uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
Like, that's my brother, not my dad. So just even the kids that we've had, like, oh, that's Lee and Brendan, or can I call you mum and dad? Do you mind? Like having to ask us, and then people are like, oh, you're such and such's dad and mum. We're like, yep, and you're right. It's that secret thing, isn't it? So, but
it's really hard to live with.
It is.
There's a lot of shame and guilt, you know, that comes with that. They're like, oh,
absolutely, and they're not quite sure where it all comes from. You know, that if you if you actually said, well, why do you feel that shame? They go, I don't really know. They can't really articulate it. They don't really know. It's just something that just gets absorbed over the years, I think.
So thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem at all. It was delightful to do it.
Enriching, and I recorded this and I actually wrote these words. It'll be enriching experience for us all, because it was. I just want to thank you for what you shared, because you share it from a visionary perspective and somebody that's walked in the journey and held the ground for such a long time and just keeps moving that piano slowly across the other side. And you've got that, exactly what you just said, the tenacity. I can see the tenacity of the long, just staying in the game. So it's just been gold. And I feel like I've gleaned so much already from knowing you.
Thank you.
But even today, just for our listeners, I think knowing it from somebody that's in the sector, that's working in there and has been for just 6 years at Anchor, but before that, all of this other experience.
Tonight was really great to speak to Heidi from Anchor. You know, it was really cool what she said about those young people who are disadvantaged. You know, shouldn't define them. It shouldn't define their lives. you know, and that really resonated with me, you know, because these young people have a lot more, you know, to give than, you know, what is defining them in the care system.